group by and partition by, they are commonly used when we do data work, especially we do data analytics or data analysis. You are going to be a data scientist. You are going to be an analyst or a data engineer. Very, very relevant, very important concepts and techniques. And I put together a comparison chart. Okay, so I'm just going over some basics now before we dive into the exercises. And this comparison chart is very informative. Okay, pretty simple, but very comprehensive and informative. I put it together, and I'm pretty proud of it. So we use group by and partition by in a select statement. Okay, so they are used in a select statement. And we talked about that windowing comment, right? So if we use partition by, we have to use it together with the windowing comment over. When we use group by, we don't have to. You can use group by together with over, but you don't have to. Okay, so we use group by and partition by for grouping data together when we do analytics and when we do data analysis, right? So they both organize data into groups. Like you want to find out the most popular product for each month of 2020, like 2008, whatever. You want to find out the best performing salesperson for each territory, each sales territory. So you need to group your data before you can do that, right? You need to group your sales into territory, and then you use salesperson to analyze your data, right? Or you want to determine the most popular product for each month of 2010. Then you will need to get all of your orders and then group the orders by month before you can do further analytics, further data analytics, and further data analysis, right? So they are both used for organizing data into groups. Okay, keep this in mind. Organizing data into groups. Aggregate data. Aggregate data, we're talking about summarizing data, right? So summarizing data means we want to calculate the total sales of a territory. Then you need to add up all of the order values for a territory, right? So we do a data aggregation, we do a data summarization. So group by can aggregate data, okay, can summarize data, but partition by does not summarize data, does not aggregate data. Big difference, okay, keep this in mind. Reduce the number of returned rows. This is related to data aggregation. So if we do data aggregation, say you take 100 orders of a territory, you calculate the total sales for that territory. So you start with 100 orders, 100 rows, but you will end up having only one row, right? So that means when we do data aggregation, when we summarize our data, very likely we will reduce the data size, the size of the returned data, okay, or the number of the returned rows. If we just do grouping, you take 200 records and then you break it up into 10 groups, you will still ending up having 200 records, right? You have 10 groups of 20 each. So If we just group data, we are not going to reduce the returned data size, or the number of the returned rows will not be reduced. But if we do an aggregation, we summarize data, it's a different story, right? Most likely, the size of the returned data will be reduced. And this question came up before. When we use group by and partition by, we are not limited to just one column, right? We put column or columns in group by or partition by. We are not limited to only one column. We could group by 5 columns if needed, right? We could partition by 3 columns. We are not limited to just one column. Okay, so we quickly went over the basics. Any comment or any question from the class, please? So far, okay. Now, let's.
Professor?
Yes.
Professor, I'm going to decide. And suppose we partition by multiple columns, then how will the partition be created? Like, for example, if there are 2 kind of columns, one is gender and other one is age. So suppose there are like 5 different forms of age groups, and just 2 different forms of gender groups. So how will the partition get created?
Say you rephrase your question. I think your voice was not very clear. Okay.
So Professor, if we have multiple columns and if we are partitioning by multiple columns, so for example, if we are partitioning by 2 columns, say gender and age, and suppose we have like 5 groups in age and 2 groups in gender column, then how will we partition? How will the data get partitioned?
Well, I think you are asking some general questions, but those are very good questions. We will be going over some very specific examples next. Okay, I think some of the examples will answer your questions. Why don't we do this? Let's review the examples, work on the exercises. After the exercises or during the exercises, if your questions are not answered, then we can talk about them. Then we will have something more concrete to talk about. How about that?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And I want the entire class to work on these exercises. Okay, so you can work on the exercises on a piece of paper or on your computer. The first question, we want to find the total sale amount for each territory in each month of each year. Okay, pay attention to the question. Find total sale amount for each territory in each month of each year. We are going to spend a few minutes on this. So I want you to work on this question. Then we will talk about the solutions or possible solutions. Okay. Make sure you are clear on the question. You are clear on the ask. Okay, so let me ask the class this question. So you look at the ask, right? For this question, do we need to summarize data? Do we need to aggregate data? And you can use AdventureWorks as an example, as the source data when you walk through this question, this exercise is okay. And think about the data hierarchy. So do we need to summarize data? Do we need to do data aggregation for this question? It's here, okay. Do we need to group data? Okay, so we need to do both data aggregation and data grouping as well, right? So we need to do both for this question. So how do we aggregate our data? How do we summarize our data? So we want to calculate the total sale amount for each territory, right? So how do we summarize? How do we aggregate our data? Some amount, okay, very good. But do we need to group by as well, right? So group by is required. Group by is required when we do data aggregation, right? Okay, good suggestion. So we will need to use group by because we need to summarize our data, and then good suggestions about using the territory or about grouping by territory, right? Then how do we, so when we summarize our data, when we calculate the total, right? We will group by territory, for example, but we also need to do data grouping, right? Because we want to find out the total sale amount for each territory in each month of each year. Then how do we group data for that requirement? Okay, good suggestions. So go back to our comparison chart. And we know we have to aggregate data, right? So we know for sure we need to use group by. We also need to grouping. We also need to group data together. Or in other words, we need to organize data into groups, right? So we need to do data aggregation. We know we need to use group by. We also need to organize data into groups. When we, if we want to organize data into groups, we have two options, right? We could use either group by or partition by. So to summarize data, we have to use group by, but to organize data into groups, we have some options. We could use either group by or partition by. So you think about all of these available options. What is the best? What is the best approach? Great suggestions in the chat box. Okay. So select territory ID, sum, and group by 3 columns. Excellent. Okay, so let's look at the solution for this exercise. So to do a data aggregation, to summarize data, we have to use group by. But for organize data into groups, we could use either group by or partition by, right? But I think the best approach for this question is to use group by all the way. Okay, so you can see we group by 3 columns. Okay, a lot of excellent input in the chat box, and thank you for your feedback and thank you for your input. Next, we have our second exercise. We want to find out the most expensive order for each territory in each month of each year. The most expensive order for each territory in each month of each year. So look at this question. Do we need to summarize data for this question? Okay, so we don't need to summarize data, meaning we don't need to do data aggregation, right? Do we need to organize our data into groups? How do we organize our data into groups? How do we do it? Okay, so if we want to organize data into groups, we have 2 options, right? We could use either group by or partition by. Okay, let's be more specific. If we want to use either, what columns do we need to use with them? Territory, month, year, okay? Excellent. Okay. So this is the returned data will be something like this, okay? And looks like we all got some very good ideas about what we want to use. It sounds like most of the classmates want to use partition by, right? But we have some suggested that we use group by. But one thing we know for sure is we don't need to summarize data. Okay, let's look at the solution here. You want to pay attention to the details, okay? We want to get the most expensive order for each territory, right? Each month, each year, each territory. So we use a common table expression. So how do we determine how do we identify the most expensive order? We need to do some sorting, right? And we learned about the SQL ranking function. I think that's a very good tool. So we will rank the orders, okay, by total due. Total due, that's the order value in descending. But we want to partition by or organize our data into groups using 3 columns: month, year, and the territory. So we do the ranking and the data grouping within this common table expression. But we want only the most expensive order for each partition, for each group, right? Therefore, we use this, the where clause, in the outside query. You select all columns from the common table expression, and then you say ranking equals 1. Are we clear? Okay, and you could use some other ways.
Professor Nikhil here.
Yeah.
So can we use max function for total give here instead of like making in descending order and then using rank as 1? Can we use max function for total give?
You can try that. If you use max, the maximum, the max function, your code is a lot more complex. We'll go over some examples later.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. This is the easiest way. This is the most straightforward way, the most logical way to do it. You can use the maximum, or you can just use sort your data, like total due in descending, and then you can use select top as well, right? Because select top 1 is similar to max. We will talk about that, and when you see some code, when you see the code, it will make a lot more sense to you. Okay, but you just keep in mind, if you want to find out the best thing, like the top performer or the worst performer, okay, like the extreme, in different groups, in different partitions, then this is the best way. Okay, you use a rank, and this is the base way, and you will do ranking within a common table expression. Once all of your records have been ranked, then you just use the common table expression as a regular table, and then you select top 1. I'm sorry, you select ranking equals 1. Just keep this in mind, okay? Whether you need to summarize data or not, but if you need to find out the top or the bottom performer for each and every group, and you have more than one group, this is the best way. There are other ways you can solve this type of questions. There are other ways, okay? You can try select top 1 with ties, or you can try some other things, but your code will be more complex. You will need to do more work. This is the easiest way. Okay, we have one more question, one more exercise. We want to find the top performing territory of each month in each year. okay, top performing territory of each month in each year. And the top performing territory has the highest total sale amount. Do we need to summarize data for this question? Do we need to aggregate data for this question? Okay, so we have both, right? Yes and no. And let me ask the class this way. You look at the question. We want to find the top performing territory, and the top performing territory had the highest total sale amount, right? When you look at the total sale amount, it rings a bell, right? You know, well, you know, to calculate the total sale amount, you have to do data summarization. You have to do data aggregation, right? Do we agree? Okay. So we know we have to do data aggregation. In other words, you go back to this comparison chart. You want to do data aggregation, you have to use group by, right? Because you know partition by does not do data aggregation. And go back to the question. Do we need to organize our data into groups? Do we need to organize our data into groups? We want to find the top performing territory of each month, year, right? So we need to organize our data into groups. Okay, so if we want to organize our data into groups, we have two options, right? You go back to the comparison chart. Organize data into groups, we could use either group by or partition by. So we have some options here. What would you use? What would you use? We know that we have to use group by, right? Because we want to do data summarization. We also need to group our data into, organize our data into groups. What would you use? Would you use group by or would you use partition by? Why? So there are some suggestions about using partition by. Why? Is that the only way or is that a better way? Right, okay. So keep in mind, if we want to find out the top performer or the worst performer for many groups, we want to find out the top performer or the worst performer in each group for many groups. The best way is to use rank, right? You can use some other ways, but the easiest way is to use the rank, the ranking function. If we want to use the ranking function, we need to use, we would use partition by, right? It's just a better way, the easiest way, the most efficient way. And then we know we have to use group by because we want to aggregate data, right? We want to summarize data. So simply speaking, we need to use both. So let's look at the solution here. Take a close look at the solution. Is this a good solution Or do you like this solution? Is this a good solution? What do you think? You think this is good? Do you like it? Okay. So we have some yes vote. And let me switch back to the question for just a brief second. Here's the question, okay? So take one more look at the question. Find top performing territory of each month in each year. And we also want the total sale amount. The top performing territory had the highest total sale amount. Okay, now go back to our solution. Okay, so good input from Simon. Can we group by first and then rank partition by? That wouldn't make much difference, wouldn't make difference, okay. A good thinking, thank you. I want you to take a very close look at the solution and let me know whether you like it or whether this is a good solution. Again, question. Read the question a few more times. And then go back to the solution. Is this a good solution? So we're talking about group by and the partition by, right? Let me be more specific. So if we just look at one of them first, okay. So let's look at group by first. So are we doing okay? Are we doing fine with group by? In this solution, we group by year, month, and the territory ID. Are we good? Okay, so we have a yes vote, okay. So we are good with group by. Now partition by, right? We are partitioning by month, year, and territory ID. We're not good, okay? It looks like some classmates don't like it. What's wrong with it? They look so pretty. What's wrong with it? Those columns look so logical, so intuitive. Okay, so we have some feedback, good feedback. A feedback from Varad is, if we have already grouped by these columns, is partition by possible? Yes, it's possible, right? I think, a previous question was related to this. What's wrong with my partition by? It looks so pretty. And then we want to go back to the question one more time, okay? So you read the question. Find the top performing territory of each month in each year. Okay, top performing territory of each month in each year. Each month and each year, right? We want to find the top performing territory in each month and year of each month in each year, okay? So go back to our solution now. So we are trying to find the top performing territory of each month in each year, right? So we need to organize our data into the month of each year. But we want to find out the top performing territory, and we want to get the total sale of the top performing territory of the total sale of each territory. Therefore, group by is fine. We need to group by month, year, and the territory ID. But when we do partition by, we can only partition by this, right? Month and the year, because we want to determine the base performing territory in each month of each year. Okay, I think we are getting more and more yes votes. Okay. Pay attention to details. Group by is fine. We group by 3 columns, but partition by, we will partition by only month and the year. And you go back to the question, it's very clear there, right? We just need to pay attention to details. We want to find top performing territory of each month in each year. It's very clear there. We just didn't pay much attention to that. Okay. Any question or comment? Are we clear? Are we all good? Is there still any remaining question about group by and partition by? And we have learned when we do analytics, when we do data work, group by and partition by are commonly used, right? They are commonly used. Usually, they are used together with the ranking function. So we need to summarize our data. We need to organize our data into groups for analytics and data analysis. Then partition by and group by are very good tools. So group by can aggregate data, can summarize data. Therefore, we want to do data aggregation. For example, you want to calculate the total count, or just the total amount, then you would use group by together with sum or count, right? When we need to organize data into groups, we have options. We could use either group by or partition by. But as a rule of thumb, if you want to find out the top performer or the worst performer in each group for many groups, then partition by is the base tool. For some other use cases, you could just use group by. Okay, and there are some other programming tools which are related to group by, such as select top one with ties, or they are used together with aggregate functions. They could be useful if we just want to find out the top performer or the bottom performer, and we have only one group, right? Then they are viable tools, viable solutions. But if you want to find out the top or the bottom performer in each group for many groups, usually when you have many groups, then think about using partition by with a ranking function. You just want to get the top or the bottom performer. You don't want to get everyone. Then you do your ranking and partitioning in a common table expression. Once the common table expression is defined and ready for use, you just select from the common table expression, select from the virtual table, and then you say rank whatever is one, right? Okay, any question or comment before we move on? And we have some very good discussion